Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Monday edition of the Boilermaker Lounge. I am Sam Sprunger, joined by Grant Floor. Grant, how are we this fine Monday?
Doing pretty good. Yeah. We're waking up on finals week here at Indiana Wesleyan. I'm currently at home because it's still Easter break.
Yeah,
So, uh, yeah, it's kind of a weird little situation we got going on, but ready to close out the academic year for college and get things going. So, but yeah, doing pretty good this morning. It's a little bit chilly, overcast here in Indiana, but not too bad.
yeah, I was awoken or awoke. I don't know. I was woke up. My dog woke me up to go outside at 6 a.m. and I let them out, and it's pouring.
Yeah.
And then now, just a little bit later, the sun's not shining, but there's no rain, and it's funny how the Midwest works
Yeah.
in the spring. Where you just get showers, and then all of a sudden it's fine. So, but
Yeah.
not a ton of brand new news. Not actually. I don't know of any brand new news that we've got to talk about when it comes to the Purdue Boilermaker basketball team. But we've got some topics that we wanted to talk about. Still, I guess one thing that we haven't mentioned because it just happened not too in between our shows. Will Berg committed to Wichita State, so he's going heading to Kansas to play with the Shockers there. I think it probably could be a good fit. Big men like that, like Will, if they're need to transfer usually go to programs that, not saying less, but excuse me, a little bit smaller, and in a conference where um, height is maybe a premium. When you've got some height like that. So I think it could be a situation where Wilberg could be uh, uh, could be pretty dominant in a conference for his final year of eligibility in the NCAA.
Yeah, he's gonna play against, not quite as grueling of a schedule and competition there with Wichita State, but at the same time, Wichita State's a pretty nice program. They've made some runs in the tournament
We've seen
before.
him in the
They
Final Four.
Right, yeah, and then they had the 1 year in, what was it, 2014 or something when
Mm-hmm.
they were a 1 seed, went undefeated in the regular season and lost in the second round of the tournament, but still had a really nice year. So, um, yeah, I think that's probably a good move for him where it's not like he's gonna completely fall off the face of the earth, but he's gonna get a chance to have a larger role and
Mm-hmm.
try and, be a little bit more of a factor with Wichita State. So, yeah, I think you kinda hit the nail on the head with Berg being able to be a much bigger difference just because he's 7'2", and then that will allow him, I think, to work
Mm-hmm.
on his game more and develop as a player.
Well, I think there's definitely an avenue for him to be a starter.
Yeah.
Whereas if he would have stayed with Purdue, there's not much chance that he would get much more playing time than he already got this last year, and it benefits him a lot more going to a place to where he can develop. I mean, with somebody, I mean, with that type of height and that type of presence, there's some possibilities. I mean, there still could be some professional aspirations for him. I'm not saying the NBA, but I'm talking Euro leagues or over in Europe. Who knows? Maybe eventually the NBA. I don't know, but you've got to get your experience in the NC or in college to be able to get to those aspirations potentially down the road. So, good luck to Will Berg. I appreciate what he was able to do, even though a lot of people would say not much. He did contribute a good bit in those last few games for the Boilermakers in the NCAA tournament. So whether or not he had a huge impact, it was enough of an impact to say thank you, Will. Have a great rest of your career.
Yeah, and I think you saw him make a good impact against those mid-major schools especially,
Yeah,
which I think just
yeah.
goes to show how much of an impact he can have if he's playing more at that level, for the entirety of a season. So, yeah, I think you're right. He definitely had an impact, whether it was just being able to play in practice and be a big body to make life difficult on the
Yep.
other Purdue bits, or to come in and provide a few minutes of quality relief time for guys like Trey Kaufman ran when they were in foul trouble.
Yep, absolutely. So, all right. Well, the main topic of this episode is, I mean, in the title, it's does Purdue need to spend more, and that comes from, excuse me, let's take a look at this. It comes from CBS Sports. The $10 million spent on rosters for the 2025 26 season via Matt Norlander. This is a potential now that they're expected to be, or they have already eclipsed that $10 million mark. You take a look at this list, Grant. What is the glaring omission if when it comes to the Boilermaker Lounge?
Well, obviously the Purdue Boilermakers are not on that list, and
Exactly.
considering how good of an offseason they've had, that's a pretty big deal. And then you're also going to notice some teams on there that you maybe wouldn't expect, given the fact that they haven't been as high a contenders as what you would expect for a $10 million roster, including the Indiana Hoosiers, a Big Ten program that Purdue knows all too well, but has definitely struggled in recent years.
Now this is an alphabetical list, so it's not highest to lowest or anything. This is alphabetically because they don't have firm numbers yet, but these are the ones, the top 10 that are expected. So you're looking, I see Arkansas, which is not a shock. Coach Kyle likes to spend money on getting those, once it's allowed. Well, and maybe even when it wasn't allowed, but we won't get into that part. But he likes to spend his money to get his players. BYU is one that it just really is odd to see, and I don't want to say a mid-major because they're obviously a Big 12 and they're a major component or a component of the Big 12, or at least contender. It just at least catches me off guard that it was something that they spend a lot of money to get there. They're expected to spend a lot of money. Duke, you have no. I Of course I think that fits. They've got a lot of money coming in. They're going to spend a lot of money to try to get a roster. But like you said, I use on this list. This doesn't surprise me, having seen the last regime. Mike Woodson. There's I've shared my story. He has to spend money to try to get players that are already developed. So I see that they spend, but the fact that they're still expecting it, well, you got to take into consideration they have to rebuild an entire roster because they had, I believe, this many, which is zero if you're not watching, people left on their roster once DeVries came in. But he's brought, I think, 4 or 5 already and gotten them. But they're expected to spend over $10 million for this roster next year. Kentucky, Louisville, Michigan. Again, not surprised with Michigan because of the rebuild that Dusty May had to get, and eventually this could turn out, to me, for Dusty May at least with Michigan, that may go down because of how well he's able to recruit going down the road in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Dusty's still in that early process too of being able to
Yep.
put rosters together. A lot of his entire roster last year was transfers, pretty much, outside of maybe a couple guys.
I was gonna say maybe
Um,
2 or 3 of the
yeah,
entire roster.
and then a lot of them, of course, would be out of eligibility or go to the NBA, like Danny Wolf. So he's trying to replace just like everybody else. You do see a lot of your power programs here, like Kentucky, North Carolina, Duke, BYU. Like it's surprising because of the size of their school and whatnot. But you look at the past couple of years, and they have just spent a lot of money and pulled in some
Yeah.
great players. They were a good team last year. They've got the #1 overall recruit this year, and AJ DeBansa coming in. Plus, they are still going after some transfers. Knowing the rosters that BYU has put together these last couple of years, it doesn't surprise me that they're one of those $10 million teams. In fact, I'd say they could potentially have some of the deepest pockets in the nation just with the rosters they put together. But it surprises you, considering, like, if you were to name your top 10 programs that would be spending money, BYU is not going to come to your mind
No.
immediately unless you know what they've added. Um, but pretty much everybody else on this list outside of BYU and then IU, considering the level that they've been playing at, isn't too surprising for me because you're looking at teams that were top 4 or 5 seeds in the tournament and are putting together major rosters. But also, you want to take note, this doesn't say they spent 10 million on transfers. It says they spent $10 million overall. That includes retaining players that they already
Correct.
had. Because like that's a big thing for Purdue is they spent money, but not just on bringing in 3 transfers, but on making sure Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, and Trakoff and Wren don't go anywhere.
Well, and the kicker is they're still not in the $10 million range
Right.
with doing that. Not, and this is this is where my mind goes. The top, let's say, it wasn't really released, at least that I'm aware of, greatly. But last year's national championship winner, the CFP, so the Ohio State Buckeyes, they spent $20 million on their roster. We're talking half as much for about a sixth as many players
Yeah.
for a basketball program. But to think that, and I'm sure that there are football rosters now after the last year that are bigger than the 20 million that Ohio State was at. And it was rumored. It wasn't a hard number. But the fact that 20 million puts together a roster of 85 and wins the national championship, you look and see 10 million for these basketball teams, and only one of this list of 10 did not make the NCAA tournament last year. I'll give you one
Right.
guess as to which one. I mean, and we all know that it was IU that didn't make it, but yet they are in this list of the top 10, spending 10 million. They've got a lot to put together because they've got to put together their entire roster to get it. I get it. I get that they're going to have to spend money, but if you don't see Houston, you don't see Purdue, you don't see Florida, and don't get me wrong, they spend money, but they're not breaking the bank to retain the players that they've got. They're paying fairly, but I think it has to do with the culture in which they've developed over the course of the years, with Kelvin Sampson, with Matt Painter, and with Todd Golden. They've done it to where they've retained those players that don't necessarily, they like the money, but they'd rather win, and set a
Yeah.
culture that prepares the program for that.
Yeah. You don't see UConn, you don't see Auburn, you don't see Kansas.
Yeah.
Kansas is one you would probably expect to see, given that they pulled in transfers quite a bit these last few
Now the
years and
fact that Hunter
simply put.
Dickinson and AJ Storer are gone might help.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. And they definitely, I think, could still add some pieces, but um, yeah, it just shows uh, it's when you're just kind of, I don't know, you got to be careful with how you use your money, and that's where Purdue has done a really good job because Braden Smith, they are not paying him nearly as much as what other schools would have been willing to pay him. From what we've heard, like
Mm-hmm.
other schools would have paid a good potentially $4 million to bring in Braden Smith on the roster. There were whispers that Smith was going to go there, and obviously there was nothing to them. But the fact is, Purdue has built this brand of loyalty and culture that allows them basically to spend less money, to offer less money, but it means more. And then these players are like, I might be able to get a little bit more money somewhere else, but because I can win at Purdue and because it's such a good place to play, that's where they're going to go and that's where
Mm-hmm.
they're going to stay. So, um, to me,
Excuse
the
me.
title of this episode is "Does Purdue need to spend more?" I think both of us are in the camp that no, they don't need to spend more
Okay.
because it's not that they don't have money. It's just that they can use the money well to make sure they build their roster the way that they need to. I mean, Purdue's roster this season has been built basically to perfection between keeping players and bringing quality guys in to supplement and fill roles without basically just buying the best roster you can. And I don't think we're going to see that be successful in future years. Like I don't think we're going to see the most expensive rosters winning national championships necessarily. It could happen that way, but it's not like you're going to take these 10 teams and they're going to be the top 10 teams next
Right.
season. They're
Well,
yeah.
well, I was just gonna, and I apologize if I cut you off.
No, you're good.
What you may see the highest spending roster win the national championship, but it's not going to be through not picking on IU, but yet pulling them out, rebuilding an entire roster and putting together the most expensive roster because they had to go pay for all of their team to come into play. That you like you said, you can't just go buy the best players and expect to be the best. You have to be able to develop. You have to be able to gel. You have to have a good mix of new to veteran. And that's what Houston did last year to get to the national championship game this last season. I mean, we're talking about the two that played in the national champion. Shoot, the last four teams to play in the national championship game are not on this list.
Yeah.
You've got UConn, Purdue, Florida, Houston. None of those are on this top 10 list. Now, that doesn't mean they don't spend money. They absolutely do. But I think they develop their players. Yes, they go portaling. They get some players to add in, but they recruit well, they develop well, and they have built a loyalty from their players to the program, and vice versa. The program is loyal to them as well. I think with Camden Heide and Miles Colvin, I think Matt Painter had a really honest conversation with them and said, "Look, you're looking at no more playing time than you were getting last season. So if you want to go explore, or if you want to go to the portal and find somewhere that will get you more, fantastic. We wish you well." That's loyalty, because they don't want to, handicap these guys to where they can't realize their aspirations of maybe going to the NBA or professional basketball. Well, we're going to be honest with you. We've been, those players were loyal to Purdue. Purdue was loyal right back to them.
Yeah, and the players that come in are the same way. Like, the players that come in don't come because of the money. They come because they want to win at Purdue. And that's
nice.
Huge. Yeah. Like that, and like, again, the money's fun and it's good.
Mm-hmm.
Braden Smith is probably really happy about the fact that he gets paid quite a bit of money to play at Purdue, but that's not the reason he's there. Like, he's there to win basketball games and to expand his career. Mm-hmm. And I think you look at the transfers Purdue's brought in, like Lance Jones. He wasn't there for any type of money. He was there to win basketball games and go after a championship with Purdue. And that's what Oscar Clough, Omer Meyer, Liam Murphy are all going to be there to do. Not just to make money, but to go out and win a championship. I think there's a lot of value to that, not just with the players that you have to let go or the players that you retain, but the players that you bring back or that you bring in from the portal. So that's really huge. I think it's also going to be interesting to watch how this continues to develop. A lot of coaches are calling for NIL regulations right now. There's like no caps, no regulation how much money you can spend on a roster. I feel like in the next couple of years we're going to start to see that, just because I think the vast majority of the basketball community sees this as kind of something that needs regulation. And with that many people that are in on that, I think you're definitely going to see it. And so will this era of spending money as much as you have on a roster kind of start to change if regulation comes in? That'll be something interesting to watch. But now in these years where we don't see that, you're going to have these type of teams that will be able to pay tons of money, build these rosters, and maybe be competitive, but ultimately it'll be up in the air on whether it works as well as they'd like it to.
I honestly think I've heard it thrown around multiple different radio shows. I'm a weird dude. I listen to college sports radio, talk radio. But that's kind of what I do, what we do. But I sit there and listen, and I've heard it multiple times that, and they were talking about football, but it can go with basketball too, is when a mid-major loses a player to a school, there should be some compensation. Now, and I'm not saying a huge amount, but at least some sort of a like a fee. Hey, we're taking somebody, because then those smaller schools can afford to pay some more players. The Purdue has a lot more money than, let's say, a Ball State in the MAC. But Purdue takes their small forward and brings them over. there should be some sort, because you're essentially looking at a free agency every year and on year out. That you're seeing kids from smaller schools move to bigger schools because they see the opportunity to win, and then also you're going to have more opportunity to make money from your NIL deal. Why not make it to where the bigger school has to pay the other school some sort of fee for for poaching their players, and then you kind of level that playing field. I'm not saying it's always going to be unlevel. It was before NIL, and so I see it as something that would allow NIL to be a little bit more palatable, I guess. There are still going to be plenty of people that are upset with it and don't like it and don't want it to happen. I think it's inevitable. The way we were, going, it was inevitable it was going to happen. And 10 years ago, we could see this happening, and so these things could have been in place by now to where the smaller schools would have at least had a little bit more of a competitive, equal competitiveness to a certain extent, I guess.
Yeah, because kind of what you're looking at right now is like a glorified version of major and minor leagues, and it always kind of was like that, but now it's just like these mid-major programs are becoming feeder programs for everybody else in the country, which, I mean, again, like you said, to a certain extent, that's just what's going to happen, and that's kind of how it's going to be. But if you can start putting in these types of regulations or ideas on, like, paying some sort of fee when you take players and having a cap on how much you can spend, it potentially
I think
helps.
that part is huge.
Yeah.
Put a cap on it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. I think that's totally. I think that's one area they can definitely go and not make anybody crazy upset, because that's what most coaches are calling for. Yeah, there will be programs that would benefit from being able to have no cap that will lose that benefit and probably not be super happy about that. But compared to everybody else, that's kind of probably a direction I see them going. But those types of things will help make sure that the playing field is even enough that we don't lose kind of the what makes college basketball special. Because honestly, I don't know whether this really was a huge part of it, but we did see an NCAA tournament this year that was a lot more chalky than normal, where you had basically the higher seeds winning, 4 1 seeds in the Final Four. I think 7 of the top 8 seeds were in the Elite Eight. Could have something to do with the fact that a lot of the transfers and a lot of the better players from these mid-majors and lower level schools are transferring to better universities. So you're seeing a lot of these loaded rosters on the high major programs, and the mid majors are maybe a little bit more depleted. It might be that doesn't make a difference at all, and next year we see a much crazier bracket. But at the same time, we haven't seen this chalky of a bracket in years, and we're supposed to be having more parity in college basketball than we've ever seen before, and yet this year it was quite the opposite.
And I wouldn't necessarily disagree, but if you think the year before last, when Purdue went, the year before when Purdue got beat by FDU, I believe it was a 4, a 5. I mean, you had San Diego State, UConn, Miami,
and FAU.
And FAU. So that was a 9. That was a 5, a 4. There were no ones, and NIL was still a thing. Now, was it the animal we're dealing with now? Not quite as much, but still. I mean, and back before NIL was a thing, we did have all 4 1 seeds make it to the Final Four at one point. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying maybe we had an anomaly of a season this year where we had that chalk go through. Could it be? Absolutely. But I think that's what, in the next 2 years after this year, it's all number ones, and all 8 of the top 8 make it to the Elite Eight, or at least a good percentage, then maybe, okay, we can attest it. You can't do that after one season, I don't think, because of the fact that we've had all ones make it to the Final Four in the past. And we had just got done not too long ago of having no 1 seeds while we were in the middle of NIL. But like I said, we also experienced over 2,000 players in the transfer portal, which closes tomorrow. Thank goodness the window closes for entry. Now, players can still be in the portal and don't have to decide by tomorrow, but it closes tomorrow. So there will be officially the roster will stay unless they choose to leave. Now, I mean, which means they just leave school. But I don't see that happening to anything on the Boilermaker roster. And I think they're done. I think they're done, like Dustin said.
Yeah. I think Purdue probably has their roster pretty much set. I think that the last couple of years, you've definitely seen an exponential rise in NIL and transfer portal situation, like even compared to 2 years ago. But I also think, like you said, it's only one season. And you look at the Final Four teams this year, Duke's the only one that was on that list. Auburn, Florida, Houston, none of them were on that top 10 list. They all, I think, brought in transfers and used it to supplement, or at least brought in good freshmen.
Yeah.
In the case of Auburn, but they did not like build entire rosters from the portal or anything like that. And Duke, even like they were on that list, but again, it was mainly freshmen, which we've seen Duke do for decades now. So they only brought in they brought in 3 transfers, but only one of them started. It wasn't like they built the roster around it.
Right.
So I'm not trying to say that like the portal was a direct contributor to the 1 seeds, but I think if it keeps going the way it's going, you're just going to see these major schools start to get more powerful and could start to damage what mid-majors can do, and just make life a lot more difficult for them, which is a huge part of, again, what makes March Madness special, is being able to watch those mid-majors compete against the big guys and do some damage. And I'm a big preserver of what we have with March Madness. Like when there are expansion talks and things like that about changing it, I'm very hesitant to be on board with that, because I feel like what we have is so good. And I feel like, in the case of expanding to 70 some or 80 some teams or whatever they've talked about in recent months, like, to me, there's a better chance that just kind of waters down March instead of actually helping it to grow. But I can see the benefets too. I
think the biggest benefit is it puts money in the pockets. That's the biggest thing. And but I agree. I was hesitant to make it 68, but it does actually make a little bit of sense as to with new conferences developing, and that's why it expanded out the way it did. Is that I think it gave 2 more at-large berths, and then expanded to 3 more conference automatic bids. So because it just was a little bit of a different amount, or it just didn't make sense. And it still feels odd. I still call them the play-in games because for the longest time of my life, it was 64, and that's a perfect number. 4 regions, 16 each. It works its way down perfectly. The way they've incorporated the opening round games have done well, to where you've got 2 16s playing, or 2 16 seed games going in there to play to fill in their portions of the bracket, and then 2 large games that fill in. I'm okay with it. It still feels odd, but there are also people older than I am that can say, well, I can remember when it was 42 teams or whatever, so it's definitely grown from what it started out as. And I think we've got the perfect amount. It makes the most sense. If that's the case, eliminate your conference tournaments, make your regular season champions the automatic bids, and start during conference championship week with the NCAA. I don't want that, but if that's or make the conference tournaments the opening part of the NCAA, and then by the time you get out of it, you have just the conference champions left. Do you want that? No. So you've got to do one or the. I also don't want to be playing until almost June. Excuse me, June. Watching some games that are just abysmal because of the matchups, the smaller teams with the bigger teams. Yeah, you'll have an
Yeah.
occasional upset, but for the most part, you're going to get, like you said, watered down competition to where, you know, I you didn't see it as much. You don't see it as much in the men's game, but the women's, especially in the early days, the 60 and 70 point wins by the higher seeds. You don't want. I don't want to see that. I personally do
Yeah.
not want to see that.
Yeah, and going back to what you said about conference tournaments, like basically everybody is in the NCAA tournament because it starts with the conference tournaments.
Yeah.
Everybody has a chance, and then
Yep.
you get if you can win it, then you get yourself a bid to the NCAA's, and you still have your at larges, which I think is good in the case of like the power conferences because you have several teams that can be deserving of
Yeah.
going, and so you want to be able to see them have a chance. But like yeah, expanding it's just like everybody technically has a chance anyway, even though I know like you have some at larges like this year with West Virginia and IU that everybody thought should get in over North Carolina. But you're gonna have that no matter how big of a field
Yep.
you have.
Yep.
And so it's like let's other than the fact that the NCAA can make money by expanding, I I just don't think it's a good idea. So
Well, and to every season, and luckily in my lifetime, I haven't had to experience it with Purdue. But I would say the same thing if it was Purdue. If you're on the bubble and you feel like you got slighted, do better.
mhm.
I mean, I know that's easier said than done, but do better, and then you don't have to worry about being on the bubble. And some seasons are just gonna fall that way. 2 years ago when Indiana State missed it, they were in the net top 30, first team ever to miss the tournament from being in the net top 30, and they griped a little, but then they went and did their business. They went to the finals of the NIT. So I mean, is that the same? No. Would they have made the Final Four in the NCAA tournament? Probably not. But you know what? They made the best of their situation and went and did their job at that they were posed with. Um, but at the same time, if you're going to sit there and just complain, do better, and then you don't have to worry about being on that bubble. You know. But that's neither here nor there. I'm not going to get too much into that. But at the same time, it's not too far from truth for the fact of win a couple more games, maybe you don't have to even worry about it. You know,
Yeah.
beat Northwestern on that Tuesday night instead of losing to them in overtime. And I'm just picking Northwestern. It doesn't, I'm just saying, but it's don't expand for expansion's sake. It doesn't make the product better because you've got more of it. It just makes more of a product that maybe isn't as good.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, Indiana knew what they had to do to basically secure a tournament spot. I'm guessing West Virginia did too. Um, they like even in the conference tournaments, they could have just won a game in the case of Indiana, and they
IU
probably
beats
were going to
Oregon, they
be in.
probably are in.
Yeah, so like they controlled their own destiny to a certain extent, and then when they didn't do what they needed to do, were relying on some courtesy from the committee. Didn't get it, and did they deserve it? Potentially. Like I'm not saying they didn't deserve to get in the
Mm-hmm.
tournament over North Carolina, but uh, it's just when you leave your hands in the fate of the committee, you don't know what to expect, and you never want to put yourself in that position. Um, but like at the same time, winning basketball games is hard. Like I'm not trying to
Oh
say
yeah.
it was like a no brainer for what they could have or should have done. I'm just saying like they had their chance just like anybody else in a conference
Mm-hmm.
tournament or end of regular season. So some teams are going to make the most of it and some teams aren't, and that's just how it's going to happen.
Excuse me. Yeah, and if you remember, I don't know. I did mention on this show and another one. Uh, I felt IU should have made it. At least into the opening round games to where they had an opportunity to get into the field of 64. But at the same time, I'm not sitting there complaining, A, because it's IU, but B, because they knew what they needed to do. And you know what? All 4 1 seeds made the Final Four, so maybe the committee didn't do a bad job.
Right.
So I don't know. But at the same time, don't expand just for expansion's sake. That is silly to do that because they say, well, we've got 3 weekends of great. What if we make it 4? No, you'll get 4 weekends of okay.
Yeah.
Or at least one
Yeah.
weekend of okay.
Right. It's not going to add anything, in my opinion. Not the quality of it. Well,
Very, very rarely would you get somebody that makes the Final Four out of that first weekend.
right.
It's
Yeah.
unusual now where you get somebody that is a lower seed. I mean, it happens, and it has happened. We talked about just 2 years ago that it happened where no one seeds got there, and they were a 9 and da 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 da. That's rare. That's very
Yeah.
rare. It's not the norm, and a lot of times people don't want to watch that. They want to watch the juggernauts, the favorites make it and play in that final weekend, to where you get a Final Four like we had this last year.
Yeah.
With the 4-1 seeds, it was whatever your thoughts are on what Duke did and what Houston did in the finals, it was still a really good weekend of basketball.
Yeah, and
Really
those
was.
3 games were all real, like, there were no major blowouts.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody made it a game.
Yep.
Auburn and Florida were going back and forth. Duke and Houston, obviously, with the Houston comeback, and then the championship game that came down to the wire. Like, that's great stuff, and that's what you
Sure.
want to see. And like you said, expanding just increases the chance that we don't get that.
Right. Well, that brings us to the end of the Monday edition of Boilermaker Lounge. Good stuff. Hopefully, this coming Friday we'll have a little bit more of a grasp of the comings and goings. Like I said, I don't anticipate our roster changing one way or the other. People leaving. Not saying it couldn't happen. Later the day we could have 4 people enter the portal or declare for the NBA. But the fact remains is we all feel that, including Dustin Schutte from Friday, feel that we're pretty solid with what we've got. There's not going to be, if there's going to be an ad, it's not going to be a major ad, and we don't anticipate anybody leaving.
Yep. Everything sounds pretty good.
And that means we will probably enter the season at least a top 2 a team in the preseason. Now, don't get me wrong. Kansas was the number 1 the last 2 years in the preseason, and we saw how that worked. So it's not a guarantee of anything, but knowing what we just talked about, knowing our roster and the players that make that roster, it should be a pretty darn good year for the Boilermakers, and hopefully we'll have more news on things or topics to come with that on Friday.
Yep. The roster is looking great. They got, every time you get 2 All-Americans back, plus 3 starters from a championship team 2 years ago, and you bring in some highly touted transfers to supplement, you're looking pretty strong.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this Monday edition of the Boilermaker Lounge. For Grant Flora, I'm Sam Sprunger. We'll see you on Friday.